All right. So you remember last time we were talking about that when we see someone in the uniform, that we will respond to that uniform because of um, our memory systems. We
Mm,
remember that uniform, but there is other stuff that's happening in there in in the way of using the example of being able to transmit a feeling.
mm,
Like a violin will pick up a note from a trumpet.
mm,
There's a sympathetic vibration that exists, and we share that with all of the rest of the animal and plant universe.
mm,
That ability to communicate that many people use and pick up on consciously, others study about it, but most everybody is a natural born user of it without a clue about what they're doing.
mm,
Like the barfly wants other people to come to drink with him.
mm,
Why does he want that? Is because that justifies to him that it's okay if I drink if this guy drinks too. If this
mm,
guy's a teetotaler, then him just being here makes me feel bad and guilty and
mm,
ashamed of what I'm doing.
mm,
But if the guy comes and he drinks with me, then everything is okay.
mm.
All right, that's the underlying stuff that's under there, but it happens so quickly that it's not even done with a thought. It's a conclusion that's reached immediately.
Mm, mm,
As soon as he sees a guy, oh, come have a drink with me.
mm,
So this is a way that um, this sympathetic vibration happens, and that one of the things that is part of the practice of meditation is to open ourselves to this,
mm,
and that when people can do it without knowing what they're doing, then they get all mystical and teary eyed and everything like this. It's like being in full blown nurture of
mm,
your entire environment. It's just
mm,
there to nurture itself into everything around it.
mm,
Um, and so this, this is actually where the teaching of Paticca Samuppada meets the
mm,
higher jhanas.
mm, mm,
All right,
mm,
so the way that we've been practicing at level, let us say, of first jhana
mm,
is going to be able to note the feelings and be
mm,
able to change those feelings
mm,
out of being critical
mm,
into being nurturing.
mm, mm,
But as we get the mind faster, we get down to the point, and there's actually a key for it. And the key is to talk about things choicelessly in the way of in perception and consciousness, not taking an object. So that when we use the eyes, we stop looking at something
mm,
and we just gaze.
mm. Did you say choicelessly? Is that the word? Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, okay.
because we're constantly making choices about what we're going to look at,
Mm, mm,
rather than not making any choices about it, but let it become completely open.
mm,
An example is that if we're looking across the field
mm,
and there are trees starting the forest on the other side over there, if
mm,
I look at something, I may miss something else.
mm,
But if I
mm,
just gaze at the entire forest over there, then
mm,
anything that moves is going to catch the attention of the eye.
mm, mm,
But not if we're looking at something.
mm,
And so that's a diversionary move.
mm,
Is
mm,
that if you are here, you go one of your friends to make a noise or a sound way over there, and then you'll get their attention, and their attention is focused on that
mhm,
thing, and
mhm,
now you can go do everything. But if
mhm.
they're not focused on anything, then as
Mhm.
soon as you move or make a sound, they'll know it. You see this in movies all the time that the guy's hiding over here and he picks up something and throws it way over there, and the cops
Mm,
chase
mm.
over there,
Yeah,
and you like that. It works every time. That's
every
the way the
time.
mind works. Is that when we're paying attention to something, we're missing out on everything else.
Mhm,
And so, really, the art of practicing Anapanasati correctly is first we learn to keep the mind onto something for a long time rather than just jumping from object to object. Is we teach it to jump to a particular object, like the breathing and flattening the mind and the little list that we have. But as we open up, then we come to taking in that solid attention span kind of awareness, we open it to how many objects there are there, to the point that there are so many of them that none of them are actually an object anymore, to where you're just here in your environment. It's like the fish finally coming to understand that he's in a sea, that there's actually water here all around. Okay? And it is a magnificent feeling, and it comes to us with vision in the sense of not taking an object. And so how do we do that? As soon as we recognize that we've grabbed hold of an object,
we let it go.
It becomes a hindrance, and we release it. We let it go. This is actually the secret part of the last part of Anapanasati that I don't talk about so often. And that is step 13 through 16 is all about, see, everything is constantly changing. Everything is in motion. We're in a sea. One of the students said it this way, it's like we're in a blender. A high-speed blender, and everything is moving around us according to the laws of nature. And we think that we're not. We think that we're steady and solid, or in fact, we're not. Everything is changing. And because of that, we actually have a whole lot less influence in ways than we think. And so it's best that we have our influences, let us say, based in wisdom, rather than having our influences based in ignorant feelings. Okay? In other words, we wake up and become wise to what's going on, but in the process of doing that, in this case, it's intentionally learning to not take an object, not look at anything, just to look, to gaze. All right, and the other way was with the body. This is what is referred to basically as the Bhojana, is when the body is connected to the universe. And the example is that imagine that you're sitting under a shimmering white sheet. So that that's what the body becomes. Now you're just a shimmering kind of blob. Remember we used the word gushy?
Yeah. Yes.
Now we're talking about that we begin to see even the reality that we're in is gushy. The boundary between the skin and the air above it is gushy boundaries. It's not as flat like this, and below its skin and above its air. No, it's very much interactive. And we know that because just the tiny little hairs on the arm are antennae, every one of them, picking up all kinds of stuff. And so we we have a kind of a sensing system that even the dogs we talked about a while ago, they don't have it because they have fur to protect them. And so ticks can bite them, and they don't get it. But if a tick bites you, man, you're going to know it in a minute, and you're going to know exactly how to take that tick off. That's because our skin is different than theirs. Because we've got so many more receptors than they do. But most people, they don't like that. They don't like the sensation of being cold or the sensation of being hot. In fact, Tam's constantly talking to me about how cold she is. She does not like and I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it gets down to 60 degrees, that's just magnificent.
Yeah, that sounds good.
That's Fahrenheit, by the way. Not getting.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah. Not cooking
hot.
out there.
So anyway, in this state, one of the ways to practice is to let the eyes gaze, and as soon as you see something, you recognize, without even telling yourself this, that it can be almost a visual kind of thought or
Mm.
a recognition
Mhm.
rather than a storyline. And just keep gazing, moving.
Mhm.
Just keep, in other words, every time you take an object, you move to
Mhm.
another.
Mhm.
Okay, and so by using any object
Mhm.
uh, um, as something to move away from, that's
Mhm.
that relinquishment of
So,
letting everything go. And as soon as you let that go, now you can take on something else, but you let that go immediately also. This is one of the ways of speeding up the mind or being able to receive data faster, is
mhm.
because we're not processing it nearly so much.
Mhm. Mhm.
When we do a lot of processing,
Mhm.
then that takes time away from the actual experience
Mhm.
of the here now.
Mhm. So when I um recently, what I've been doing is doing the like samadhi practice at the start, and trying to work on the jhanas at the start, and then towards the end of the sit, trying to do kind of open awareness, but with listening, which I
Yes.
find sort of more naturally, much easier to take a kind of broad view, and not to try and let things kind of come and go, and to move to do what you describe. And I found that and then at the very end of the sit, I'll often open my eyes to try and sort of smooth the transition into normal life, and I find it sort of there's quite often like a moment of real like blissful I don't know how to describe it other than that I'm like here and you see all the objects on.
Perhaps whelmed.
Yes, yeah.
Not overwhelmed, just whelmed.
Yeah. The right amount of whelmed. But I find that with visually things that, I mean, the uniform's a great example, because there's there's no real gap between seeing and knowing for me, and so it's quite hard for me to kind of, but then conversely, there's something about the specificity about certain images, like like sunlight on a table or something, and it can be so clear and so specific as an image that it can sort of bring you. It can be its own moment of sati in a way. Um, so it's interesting what you're saying, because it's something quite I've kind of struggled with a bit, is the how close seeing and kind of thinking, like thinking what something is.
Okay. Here's an example that I used with Matt, and maybe this will help also for you.
Mhm.
Imagine that you are, let us say, close on stage or close by,
Mhm.
or that you're the cameraman there,
Mhm.
or that you're watching the video of, but then
Mhm.
when it's the video, there's a little bit more, and that it's an orchestra playing,
Mhm.
and in front of the orchestra is a violin, and that he or she is playing, say, Tchaikovsky's first violin concerto,
Mhm.
and that it is actually it's in D. And if we are watching it in the sense of watching the violinist and the virtuosity of the violin and the way
Mhm.
that he or she is using the bow
Mhm.
and the actual fingering that they're doing, and listening very closely to that,
Mhm.
we're going to miss the entire rest of the orchestra.
Mhm.
But and generally everyone who is into classical music moves back and forth. And this is one of the
Mhm.
reasons why they do the cameras the way that they do, is
Mhm.
sometimes they're doing a pan, and that's when you let the whole show in. And sometimes they're focused right on one musician because they're the ones who playing a short solo, or in the
Mhm.
case of a concerto, they're the star, but still, even they're the star, you still have the orchestra playing behind it.
Mhm.
So, where is your mind now? Because the mind is listening to that music, say, even if it's on a YouTube,
Mhm. Mhm.
where your focus may not be where the camera is focused.
Mhm. Mhm.
That the camera may be focused on, let us say, uh, the violin section,
Mm-hmm.
but you're really interested in hearing the horns.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're listening to the horns,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but you can't see that. But even so, you're doing that, you're
Mm-hmm.
still listening to something in particular rather than letting the whole orchestra come in,
Mm-hmm.
which is the more difficult to do, is to
Yes.
listen to everything all at the same time. It's whelming. Okay, so that's an example of sound.
Mm-hmm.
Sights are
Mm-hmm.
exactly the same way, except for one thing, and that is here, at least in this neighborhood, it is in fact a complete symphony orchestra of colors
Mm-hmm.
playing all the time, non-stop music right here. And we often miss it because
Mm-hmm.
we're paying closely attention to look at something like a motorcyclist or someone's coming in or whatnot like that, and we're not even paying attention to the enormous beauty that the
Mm-hmm.
whole show is. Okay, so this is that opening quality of not taking on an object,
Mm-hmm.
and we begin to become really, really superwhelmed with the eyes and the ears and the touch of the skin
Mm-hmm.
and the feeling of the cloth on the skin and the breathing and all of that's happening all at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's happening at a speed called causality.
Mm-hmm.
The speed of causality, we don't even know how to measure how fast it is, but it's probably the nano of a nanosecond.
Mm-hmm.
Something down like septillion of a second.
Mm. And it's sort
Because our
of
cameras are just way too slow
mm-hmm,
to
mm-hmm,
be able to detect something that fast. But everything is a quantum.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Everything's a unit of time. Everything is in an event. So that domino that touches the next domino at that physical level, actually at the
mm-hmm,
level of causality, is
mm-hmm.
one molecule touching, bumping, or changing its relationship to other atoms in the
Yeah,
neighborhood.
yeah. This is something that I've been wondering recently in sits, and I'm not sure if it's the right question to be asking, but like when when we talk about a mind moment, when Buddhadasa talks about a mind moment, are we talking about like at some level in the brain and at least one atom has moved? You know, because everything's constantly jiggling around. We're in.
Right, a mind moment.
Mm-hmm,
Let us say that there's several different ways of defining it, but the most useful
mm-hmm,
way to define it for an individual is what that individual can detect.
right.
How fast can you see things?
Mm-hmm,
That that changes that mind moment.
mm-hmm,
So how many mind moments can you have depends upon how long it takes to process the mind moment that you pick up and detect.
mm-hmm,
Okay.
mm-hmm,
And so this is the speed of perception.
mm-hmm,
The
mm-hmm,
more processing that the perception has to do,
mm-hmm,
then the longer it takes.
mm-hmm,
If it's very easy to figure it out, then there's very little processing time, but some.
mm-hmm,
But if you're not even bothered to process anything, then you can take a whole lot of stuff in
mm-hmm,
much faster.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The bandwidth is bigger,
Uh,
basically. Yeah.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So that's why I was talking about throwing, the guy who's hiding from the police in a big room or whatever like that, and he's throwing an object, and they go chase the sound, and
Mm-hmm.
he can get away. That's what we're talking about here. That we continue to jump from object to object in a mind moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just like an electric fan that has no air, what
Mm-hmm.
happens to an electric fan when it has no air?
I don't know. This sounds like a koan.
It's not if you get a fan and deprive it of air, a box fan, and put pieces of cardboard in front on both sides.
Make a big noise. I don't know.
No, what happens is that because it's not moving any air,
Mm-hmm. It stops.
Because it's not moving any air much. There's no resistance. Does that give you a hint?
It just goes really quickly.
Yes, exactly. It speeds up to nearly double the speed.
I could have got that one quicker. My mind moment was quite long on that one.
Exactly. You got my point. Now you've got my point.
Yeah, I felt that one clunking through.
Right. So when we clunk through on something trying to figure it out, that sometimes is a long mind moment. And we need to wake up in the middle of those, because if you wake up in the middle of it, now you've gotten a new mind moment. So sati is the ability to intentionally bring on a new mind moment.
So am I right in thinking a mind moment is a kind of umbrella that can contain lots of individual perceptions within it, and that there's a sense of kind of cohesion from moving up from sense perception?
The reality is that every mind moment has tons of stuff happening in that mind moment.
Yeah. Okay.
Because everything that's operating is operating at the speed of causality, but our mind moments are clunky depending upon how much time it takes to process the data that we're taking in to make sense of it. And when we stop processing that data, the mind gets faster and faster in the sense of picking up new data. So it becomes very easy to, and then you pick up data so fast you become whelmed.
But you're not saying that, like, as some people might probably try and claim, that like meditation makes you like super brainy. It's not like a kind of intellectual processing power. It's like it's a way of living as close to possible in the moment, and the richness of the moment, the fullness of the moment, right?
Yes. But there is something else, and that is generally these guys who were capable of doing that developed a side skill, and that side skill is that they remember things. In the old days, they could chant many hundreds of suttas. I've met guys. In fact, I lived with one like that. I was whelmed with him every time because of how good he was with suttas. Me, not a clue. Well, let us say that I can chant my way through various bits and pieces I know for about a page worth of text, where he can do whole volumes. So, but there's also that intellectual capacity. That here's one thing, that even though the books that are written in translation of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa are fairly sophisticated and highbrow, that's done by the translator. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa spoke at a very rudimentary, low-class street language.
Interesting.
For everybody to understand what he had to say. But you could tell even with that, he was extremely sophisticated in his knowledge and his understanding of the suttas. So he was really intelligent in the suttas. He really knew them. But in fact, I remember more than once having thoughts of jealousy. That he knew the sutras so well. And I made it kind of a goal. That was my goal. Upon his death, I made a kind of a dead Bhikkhu Buddhadasa resolution. And that was that I was going to learn the sutras myself also. But you see, that resolution was made even before there was hardly any translations. The first book that really was of most value was Bhikkhu Bodhi's first translation of the Majjhima Nikaya. That came out in 1995. I remember it was like a gold mine. I ate that book.
Wait. Bodhi was the first to translate the suttas into English?
No. The Polytext Society was the first.
Yeah. Okay, when was that, though?
But their books were very expensive, hard to come by, very bad translations, very highbrow. and very difficult to be, erudite, even to the point
Mm,
that the language of those things, and also old,
mm, mm.
with a
Okay.
lot of thises and thuses and
Oh,
and thou, and
mm,
you could definitely see the Christian influence of that.
mm. But were
Even though
they?
it was done in the 19th century, it was 18th century
Mm,
influence. You could
mm,
tell when these guys were educated.
mm. I shouldn't be surprised that it's so recent that they were translated, but I am. Um,
Riles Davies, I.B. Honer, and Riles Davies' wife.
mm,
Those were the three people who did an enormous amount of the translations, including putting the Pali dictionaries together. So we
mm,
have to congratulate them. They
mm,
are
mm,
like Microsoft Windows 1.0,
mm.
because we would not have Windows 10 now today, an actual functioning operating system, if we
Mm,
didn't have Windows 1.0.
mm.
And I remember struggling with 3.11. That was
Mm,
that was a famous one. And then they came out with NT and the whole history. So the same thing is going to have to be done with the translations of the suttas.
mm,
The problem with it was is that they didn't know the language
mm, mm,
and they didn't know the Dhamma.
mm, mm, mm,
And so they Christianized it and
mm,
put a lot of magic and fairy dust and all kinds of stuff in it
mm.
that doesn't belong there.
Well, I've got one of Bodhi's books that in the Buddha's words. It's I guess it's a selection, and it's really it reads really nicely. It
Right.
very clear.
That would be
Mm.
Windows 2.0, or
Yeah.
actually, yeah. So Bhikkhu Bodhi came along and did version 2.0, and he's done a very, very good job of it up to a point.
But would you say this is still? Are they faithful to the originals in your view? Like no.
Not at all.
Mm,
In fact,
mm,
I don't think that yet we're quite capable of being faithful to it, because there's a whole lot of words we just don't quite understand,
mm,
and sometimes they're key words. And so what happens is that they will take on a magical definition
mm,
because we don't know what the real definition is.
mm, mm,
Like, I heard something go bump in the night, and I called it a spook because I
mm.
don't know what it was that bumped. All right. So
Okay.
there's a lot of that kind of mentality. If I don't know what this word is, I'm going to make up something magical
Mm, mm, mm,
instead of something instinctual, which would be
mm,
the better way of doing it. That's the way that I'm looking at some of this stuff.
mm,
Another way of thinking of it is that the sutras were written at a time when the language was magical, talking about real things. Modern day English, we make a different judgment in the sense that magical things or magical language refers to magical things, and real language refers to real things. So when we use magical language, we're talking about magical things. In the Pali, they're talking about real things, but they use what we would think would be magical language, like calling high class people devas, using the word Bhagawa for the Buddha, when in fact the definition for Bhagwan or Bhagawa is not a god; it's just a fortunate one. But you go around in the Pali calling him a god, and you wouldn't do that on planet Earth here because they've only got one. You can't have so many. And so the princes and the kings all become devas. Everybody's a magical being in the Pali. So the Buddha uses a particular word for himself. That's a real word that means a real thing, and that is Tathagata, the one who is in the thisness of it all, the one who is here now. But even that has gotten magical. Now the Buddha can't be just the one who's here now. He's got to be elevated up there with all of the other things.
Yeah.
But in fact, the whole idea of Brahman, like in the Brahma Viharas, we're talking about very, very high class, but it doesn't have to be magic. Doesn't not have to be the Brahma god. In fact, in the time of the Buddha, there was no Brahma god. All there was a bunch of Brahmin priests who were trying to get their way with everything by being the boss and getting all of the kings and everybody else to donate alive animals so that they could kill them in sacrifice and then have all of the baloney for themselves. So, the suttas in so there's a lot of things to understand about how are we going to translate this stuff, because we really do have to understand the culture of this language as well as the words so that we know how to use them, because so many of the words that are in the Pali are actually words that we've got in Indo-European languages anyway. That's why they called it Indo-European. Okay, there's a common language thread, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, including, like, for instance, whom and him. Like, did you see him? Of whom do you speak, right? Where did that M sound at the end of the word come from? They becomes them. It's a case change.
Yeah.
Yeah, they went to them. Right? That is exactly the same thing, the word ending in the exact same way as Buddham Saranam Gacchami. Dative case. To the Buddha I will go. Okay? So it's in the dative case, and so naturally it's going to be Buddham. So we have all of this case stuff that's at the end of all of the Pali words, and so we have to know case and gender and tense and all of that kind of stuff, because all of the words are quite complicated. I generally myself, I'm not even interested in the part of speech it is or how it's used or the gender or anything like that. I want to know the root word. And so if I see suk, I don't care whether it's suka or suko. So but for the translations, we have to know that the basic teaching of the Buddha we can follow in the following way, because he makes a big point of it in several places, and the issue is fire. That a fire is known by its fuel. So you have a log fire or a twig fire or a grass fire or a rubbish fire, cow dung fire. These fires are known by its fuel. And that we also know that with consciousness, because he's comparing consciousness with fire. That consciousness is dependently arising and is known by its fuel. So we have eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, touch, taste. This consciousness is known then by its fuel or by its conditioning agents. So not only are we conditioned by the fact that we see because we've got eyes, but what we see also conditions our sight. And then if we recognize it, that's a further conditioning of it. And if we don't recognize it, that's a different kind of conditioning, giving rise to the feeling of confusion. So in any case, what we're talking about is that because of fire, there has to be a fuel. And so I will define it like this. Reality is a fire with fuel in all cases.
Yeah.
And magic is a fire without fuel.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Magic is a fire without fuel in the sense that we don't know the cause. And so people will make up a cause when they don't know a cause. And this is one of the problems with the Pali language is that when people have magical thinking,
mm,
then they will come up with magical answers
mm,
to questions that they don't know because they don't know what this Pali word means. And so they'll
mm,
make up something.
mm, mm,
And Wild Davies and I.B. Homer got in the habit of doing that a lot. If they couldn't make up something, if they didn't know what it actually was, they could always go back to Catholicism and
mm,
the Anglican Church and bring a whole mess of stuff in there to
mm,
plop into place to
mm,
make themselves feel good, when
mm,
in fact they didn't really know what they were doing at all
mm,
in these translations. But guess what? We all do that anyway.
mm, mm.
We do the same process. That's the human process, is that we fill in the blanks with any old darn thing we can think of.
Mhm, mhm,
And so part of Anapanasati is to see when we're doing that, to recognize that we're filling in the blank here. We don't
mhm,
really know what it is.
mhm, mhm.
But whatever it is that Bodhi said, it probably ain't it. Not
Mm,
when he's
mm.
got a magical answer to a real question.
Yeah, no, I remember. I think I mentioned last time that I was reading Buddhadasa's mindfulness with breathing, his guide to the Anapanasati, and immediately finding it much easier to understand and much more useful and helpful in practice. Even though for like large parts of it doesn't seem to be talking about the actual sutta directly, but he's just talking about what seems to be general, but actually he's getting to the very heart of what the sutta is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And then comparing that with the Bhikkhu Analayo book, which is extremely scholarly and was not helpful for me because it was just too early in my practice. It wasn't practical. But it takes great pains to be, it's comparative of the different sources, and it takes great pains to be. I mean, maybe this is an example of not seeing the wood for the trees, but you get a good sense of what the etymology of each word, but you kind of don't have a full picture, and it doesn't, you know what I mean?
One of the issues with the Paticca Samuppada in the sense of what is the mind moment,
Mm-hmm.
the same thing is true with Anapanasati in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that how long does it take to practice all 16 steps of Anapanasati?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is generally about 1 or 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
However, sometimes it really plays itself out.
Mm-hmm.
And another way of looking at it is that the beginners,
Mm-hmm.
they will sometimes get stuck in one place
Mm-hmm.
rather than recognizing that they've got to incorporate all of them. And
Mm-hmm.
so as a student grows in his skill of Anapanasati, he gets it going faster and faster, like it becomes a blend. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that in fact he's not actually focused on any one of them, but he's got all of them there. The whole
Mm-hmm.
orchestra is playing,
Yeah.
but we're not particularly paying any particular attention to one of the
Mm,
musicians.
mm, mm,
That's the way Anapanasati is a symphony.
mhm, mhm,
But wow, it's hard to get the all of that together, because that means,
mm,
because you can imagine an individual
mhm,
has to learn how many different musical instruments and then
mhm,
get the tape. So he's going to do one song, and so he's now got to do a different tape of every song, and then he's got to merge all of those things together in
mhm,
reality. And we're supposed to do all of that in a tenth of a second inside the brain, inside the mind. Yes, we can get it going.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah,
speed things out. Let's start watching what's going on.
yeah. I think this is something that has been really helpful to me. So thank you very much for your guidance on this. But knowing that the first step is really crucial, that you can't, that not to look, because what I was doing before was this kind of maybe common beginner's mistake, which was thinking of them as a sequence. And so I quite often drop the first step, the long breath, when I felt I'd kind of progressed away from it, and because I could find it a bit
Oh, but
distracting.
that long breath is actually the foundation of the
Yeah,
practice.
yeah. So it's more like
Don't forget
stacking.
the long breath, because then if you forget the long breath, then you're making the same mistake that all of them thought when that they're making when they say, "Oh, well, this is just mindful of the breathing. I'm not supposed to change or modify it or anything." Oh
Mm-hmm.
no, this entire practice of Anapanasati, the entire Dhamma that the teachers of the Buddha teaches is
Mm-hmm.
there's some skills that we've got to develop.
Mm-hmm.
There are some things that we've got to start doing,
Mm-hmm.
and so a few things that we need to stop doing and and to know the difference between them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so this breathing, he's intending to say we start with the long breath, but we never forget it.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the way that each of the points are talked about, let's just talk about, let us say, gladdening the mind is just an example. Gladdening the mind while breathing in,
Mm-hmm.
and gladden the mind while breathing out.
Mm-hmm.
This is a skill to be developed. Okay, that's actually what they're talking about. Is that we always use the breath as part of the mix.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. I think that what was
That
happening.
that's the anchor or the
Mm-hmm.
connection between all of the other parts is that we're continuing to have this breathing so that we don't have to watch it closely, but we watch it enough that we know that this is a long, deep in breath and a
Mm-hmm.
long, deep out breath.
Mm-hmm. I guess that I was before I felt that the physical sensations were somehow bringing me back to a less sort of somehow refined. I mean, this is what I used to think, kind of less
Here's the
refined.
reaction to it and the feeling of it and the thoughts to go with it is, wow, this is so nice.
Mm,
Wow on the in breath and so nice on the out breath. Okay, so this is not just a mantra.
mm,
This is the way to treat the breath,
mm,
in the
mm,
sense that if you feel doing this practice is strained or that it's a lot of effort, we're
mm,
doing it wrong.
mm,
We're doing it so that every time that we think about it,
mm,
this is a really nice breath. We're not trying to do it every breath and hard on like that. But when
mm,
we think about it, we're going to take a long, deep breath.
mm, mm,
And if we're
mm,
good, we're thinking about doing it often.
mm, 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 mm,
But it's always an enjoyable breath.
mm, mm,
The emphasis is upon this is so nice.
mm.
What a nice breath this one is.
Yeah, it's definitely because I feel like I had got to grips with quite various stages in in the sutta, but hadn't quite worked. Yeah, this is helping me to piece them together and
Mm-hmm.
to know that the first step is the foundation, and then you kind of layer things on top of it. And like when I sat,
No, let us put it this way.
mm,
The breathing is like the pie, like the pie, uh,
crust,
the
base,
crust at the bottom and the crust at the top,
yeah,
and that everything else is mixed in the middle as filling.
mm, 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 mm,
Okay,
mm,
everything else is mixed in as the filling, but the
mm,
definitely the breathing is the base.
mm,
So
mm,
that we'll have the breath and the apple, or the breath and the juice, and the breath and the
mm,
cherry, and all of that kind of thing like that. So
mm,
always each piece is
mm,
done with with the breathing. This is actually in the sutta.
mm,
Thus he trains himself
mm,
to be able to gladden the minds
mm,
while we're taking an in breath, and then gladden the mind
mm,
while we're taking an out breath.
mm. Yeah, good stuff. That I,
And then that gladdening the mind will naturally lead to
mm,
the sukha,
mm,
so that we're developing an experience sukha as we breathe in,
mm, mm,
and developing sukha as we breathe out.
mm, mm,
Satisfaction.
mm, 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 mm.
And when we get really good at this, then we can add that extra ingredient, which is the pity or the yippee. Oh, wow, this is so good.
I think I can't tell you how good the word gushy has been in terms of my practice. It's like exactly what I needed to hear somehow. It's like
Right.
it's become, I've like worked it into my practice now. It's like, oh, get gushy now, and then it really works.
It does. It feels so good.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today what we've been talking about is that when we get ourselves into that really, really gushy state, we then open further to any and everything that's happening with the senses. So we become really here now in the senses without paying attention to any object.
Okay.
That in fact we've chased the hindrances out and gotten down to a very, very little language. And so now, without needing any language anymore, we don't have to talk to ourselves about what we're looking at. So why look at it anyway? Just just be out there. Just let it be. Let it phase. Take in the whole orchestra or take in the whole forest without. You probably heard the expression, "You can't see the forest for the trees." Well, that means that people are looking at trees and are missing the whole darn forest. And so this is how we get the forest, is by not paying any particular attention to any particular tree, and you just let the whole thing be there. Or we're not looking at any individual or listening to any individual instrument. We're just letting the whole thing come in.
Okay.
And so these are the examples that we can have for everything. And by doing so, we begin to see how fast things really are changing. That, in fact, the human mind, as fast as it is pretty slow compared to reality.
Yeah.
Because we have to keep processing it to get to a conclusion of this is what I think is reality. And what we're actually now beginning to practice is, no, let's stay in reality. Let's not process it into anything. Let's just keep getting more reality and more reality in.
Okay. Well, that's really good. I can work on that in the next week. Yeah, that's really
Some
good.
people call this reality that we're paying no attention to at all, but getting it all. That's God.
Yeah.
That's the universe. That's creation. That's the the good old whatever it is. Not the flying spaghetti monster. That's something else.
Maybe this is too big a discussion for this, the end of the chat, but I'm really fascinated in that idea of what this is. Where are we? What's going on?
We're here and nothing. And everything. But it's all going on.
Yeah. No, I get that, but I guess the relationship of the individual to the sort of substrate of the world, like what this is not like my view or whatever, but what Shinzen Young,
the human, the individual has the misconception that I'm separate.
Yeah.
I am not my shirt. Okay. In the sense that we want to remain separate and special, an individual. And this we do to our great detriment. That we want to be the soloist instead of joining the band. So we're changing our perception from many to one. Unity.
Yeah.
And that unity is extraordinarily sophisticated, but we have to stop taking one object at a time and just let it all come in.
But when we get to that point where hopefully when one gets to that point where one's experiencing just the orchestra, like one is closer to God, or one is kind of
you're
God.
at one with your universe then.
Yeah, and
That's
that's the
it.
universe.
Yeah,
Is that the universe like knowing itself? Do you know what I mean? Is that the moment at which
it's not a particular moment.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get into doing these things, it'll happen any moment that you allow it to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's not an event; it's a
process. Yeah, a process. Yeah, I'm not expressing it. I don't really have the language for this yet, but anyway. I have
That's
gushy
the
though.
problem. That in fact we're trying to speak a Dhamma language that we don't even have the words for. That all we have basically is the words of conventional language.
Mm-hmm.
And so conventional language will make it into something magical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where in fact we're talking about something that's real. God is
Absolutely.
real.
Yeah.
Here he is. I thump my chest and I point all over the place. Here he is.
Yeah. Mm.
And how do we know? Is because we're not paying attention to any particular tiny piece of it. We're allowing anything and everything to come in all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to have the mind that's so sharp that we catch ourselves when we grab an object.
Mm-hmm.
So that we see that object now that we've grabbed a hold of is just like a thought of a hindrance that prevents us from being in the here now.
Mm-hmm.
So at that macro scale that we start practicing, when we get it down to the micro scale, it's still the same thing to do. We're just doing it faster now at a deeper part of the mind.
Okay. All right. I'm going to make the orchestra gushy.
I know. Isn't it marvelous? Just talking about it is gushy.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Dhammarato.
This has been such a delight. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll speak to you soon. And yeah, take care. Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.